Hey folks, welcome back to the proceedings here at DeFi Live. Great to be here. My name is Pete Townsend, Managing Director at Techstars, and I lead the Launchpool Web3 Techstars Accelerator Program in Dublin, Ireland. Got a great bunch here with me today. We're going to talk about bringing real-world assets to DeFi. Where have we come from? Where are we now? Where are we going from here? Okay. So just to start out, over here to my right, I've got Martin Quenzel, who is the co-founder at Centrifuge. He's on his fourth startup now. He was previously with Talia. And he is passionate about B2B, about financing, supply chain, enterprise software, and decentralization. Next to Martin, I've got Alejandro Gutierrez. He's co-founder and operations lead at Defactor. And he is a global supply chain guru who also has some deep expertise in blockchain, AI, and IoT. And he's also bringing real-world assets to DeFi. Phil, next to Alejandro, it's Phil Chang. He's a strategic advisor to MakerDAO. He also has deep product expertise across a broad spectrum, including crypto, DeFi, mobile, AI, SaaS, e-commerce, and energy. He's also bringing real-world assets to DeFi. I am not personally bringing real-world assets to DeFi, but all of us are bringing real-world people to DeFi Live. So here we go, folks. To start off, why don't I ask you guys, just to get going, and give us a view as to just briefly what got you into DeFi and what got you to this point, yeah? Martin, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, what brought me to DeFi? So actually more what brought me to decentralization. Yeah, I come from a centralized world, have a centralized background, and then kind of, stepped into blockchain technology 2016, first time, South by Southwest, understood what Ethereum, a programmable decentralized world computer, can do, and thought about business cases, and then with a few friends started Centrifuge even before DeFi was a thing, actually thinking about bringing tokenization to the next level. Hey, real-world assets and blockchain is a contradiction. Blockchain is garbage in, garbage out, and you need to take care. What is actually anchored in the real world is something which you can actually do not need to trust on the blockchain anymore to make it, a trustless asset, and that's what we are working on.
I gotcha. Great. Thank you, Martin. Alejandro?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so went into the rabbit hole of DeFi probably 2 years ago with a company called Console Freight, and we created this completely different protocol to conduct trade finance operations. And we were trying actually to knock into the traditional financial world for them to back up our idea, and it was impossible. Luckily, we met with the guys from Maker, guys from Centrifuge, and that was the first realization, right, for us that DeFi has so much opportunity for traditional businesses that are looking for liquidity in the DeFi space, right?
Gotcha. Great. Thanks, Alejandro. Phil?
Yeah, so I guess, is this working?
Yeah.
I guess I'm one of these guys that was a little bit skeptical about crypto for many years. And I'm kind of a tech old-timer. But when DeFi started exploding is when I really jumped in with both feet. And I just moved back to London, and I kind of thought, well, there's got to be a way that real-world assets could benefit DeFi. And at that time, it was still a very new concept. So I ended up joining the first core unit at MakerDAO that focused on real-world assets. Maybe it was the first in DeFi. And we started onboarding different kinds of assets, initially focusing on real estate and also trade finance.
Okay, very good, gotcha. And we're going to get more into these asset classes in a little bit. But just to get started with kind of how things have developed over the last number of years, Martin, maybe just start with how the Centrifuge story has evolved and what you guys have seen and what are you looking at right now at this point, yeah?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting journey. So, and in 2018, maybe someone is remembering, there was a protocol called Dharma Capital on Ethereum. That's when we actually did the first pilots to tokenize real-world assets, financing them. Then we had the pleasure to start talking to the DAO, MakerDAO, did first pilots in 2019, and then finally launched the first real-world asset on MakerDAO. So really proud of what we have achieved, and they can already see the journey. You know, there's trying, testing, iterating on it, and now finally you really see something which is out there and which is starting to scale. And where I can already see, you know, a route forward where more and more institutions, traditional players stepping into the market and actually kind of, you know, the pioneers brought the technology, and now actually the institutions bring the volume and the scalability.
And Alejandro, you've been kind of there since the beginning with, you know, and seeing some of the first assets coming from console freight onto Maker. And what were some of the original things that you guys looked at to say, all right, we've got to do, there's some things that need to open up here in order to really open up liquidity and bringing these assets in. What are some of those early lessons learned that you saw?
That's a good point, because DeFi is still really immature, we can call it like that. It's fairly young, so all the solutions are not there, and a lot of the effort has been put in the deep layers in order to just facilitate that extraction of liquidity from the DeFi space, but also just to make sure that the security is there, because it's one of the things that we need to have, is security that when those assets are locked, when the liquidity is locked, it's just going to be unlocked when an asset or a real-world asset has been validated, right? What we realized with Console Freight is that the opportunity is fantastic. The opportunity to just bring so many different assets and so many other asset aggregators that we say, what if we help these liquidity pools like Centrifuge just to attract more companies that are aggregating assets and make the process a little bit more easy or more traditional, as they say, right? So in the case they don't need to deviate much, for example, using wallets that still, we have been doing this for 3 years or something like that. Every single time that I press in that button, it's a bit scary still, yeah. Right? So just let's make this a little bit easier, and that's kind of the reason behind the factor.
Okay. And Phil, what were some of the things that that you were seeing with Maker as well in the early days? Yeah.
Yeah. So I have an interest in real estate. I've been investing in it for more than 30 years in different parts of the world, and compared to crypto, there's two really good qualities about real estate. One is that it's very stable. I mean, if you think about crypto assets, they're hugely volatile, right? The other thing is that real-world assets like real estate have very well-defined risk measurement, right? There's a lot of, you know, very highly evolved techniques for valuing and estimating risk. And that's bringing a level of sophistication to DeFi that I believe was not really there. So that's where we focused, that's where I focused initially. We onboarded the first asset originator early this year, and that was in real estate bridge loans. But since then, in partnership with Centrifuge, there's been a very wide range of asset originators, including Console Freight. But now there's nearly 10 of them, right, that have been onboarded.
I'm with you, and it's like, you know, just looking at some of the things that are happening out there and the trends, and just thinking back to my entry point in the space was, as I mentioned to you guys, was just reading the Bitcoin white paper, and that's what got me into this years ago. And quickly followed, because I didn't read the Bitcoin white paper until 2014, and it just happened to be the Ethereum white paper was relatively new at that point as well. And when I read the Ethereum white paper and started to understand where that was going, and I wasn't surprised then to see real world assets coming in a couple of years ago. But what surprised the hell out of me, Martin, was when I looked at Centrifuge and the Tin Lake dApp, right? In the Tinlight app, you can see all the liquidity pools that are out there. Seeing what's backing some of these liquidity pools was really eye-opening. And that you've got consumer credit, you've got emerging market debt, you've got payment advances, you've got cargo freight forwarding, all in these different buckets and grouping. And I'm like, this is actually happening. And when you think about the trillions of dollars out there in the market that are in these asset classes already, that's where I was like, whoa, okay. What are the asset classes that you think are going to be the most, are going to advance this story the most and fast forward it the most over the next few years?
Thank you, fantastic question. I think sooner or later, every asset class will go on-chain and will be connected and will be financed through DeFi. Very optimistic, but I think to start with, it's most likely look at two things where you do not compete with traditional finance because traditional finance isn't able to cover it. And I think unlocking value, you know, where traditional finance is falling short. And one of the examples is if you just Google World Bank SME financing gap that is for small, medium enterprises, you see that actually independent of the region and the world, 80 to 90% of the SMEs in the world are underfinanced. And the reason is not because they have worse default or they have a higher risk. Actually, if you look at those statistics, the risk and the default rate is exactly the same or almost the same, and at least not justifying the different financing rates or that they do not have access to financing at all. The difference is they don't scale with a traditional bank because a traditional bank is unable to onboard that as an asset. They cannot talk to the carpenter around the corner with 2 people or the plumber next door with 10, you know. That is one thing, and the second thing is actually that financial instruments on scale are not accessible to people, and DeFi, I think, first time in their life democratized financial instruments, which in the past actually been invented by investment bankers for investment bankers. And now it's actually everyone can use it who has a wallet and tries to understand how it works. And connecting and bringing the two worlds together, I think that is where we see scale will come from. And coming back to the pools, you see that already, you know, so that starting with real estate, and they're actually something which is rather short term, where it's smaller originations, where we help smaller players in the market with a great expertise to be successful, where we're focusing on partners like Console Freight to finance supply chains who couldn't be financed before, et cetera, unlocking value to DeFi investors, which is a stable return, which is has a complete diversified investment profile than the crypto holding they have. So it's disconnected from the Bitcoin price, it's stable, and actually has nice returns. And that is what we're focusing on right now, but I think it will be broader, much broader in the future.
Yeah, it's a really interesting context, and just that, you know, and Martin, and just a follow-up for you on this question is that what gets me thinking about these asset classes within crypto, right? And when I'm trading, I'm thinking about, all right, I'm going to set my price targets for the different assets that I'm invested in, and when it reaches a certain level, I'm going to take profits. When it reaches a certain lower point, I'm going to actually move out into a different asset. My only choice right now is stablecoins, okay? For the most part in the market to get into a safer asset. However, there are all these real-world assets that have a bit of a predictable return pattern that I now have the option of, through centrifuge, through real-world assets, to park some money in on a short-term or even on a longer-term basis. What is the outreach? And this question, obviously being a new one, what is the outreach out into the community, into the crypto community, or into the institutional community that exists already? Where do you think the flow of assets into real-world assets in DeFi is going to come from? Is it going to come from the crypto natives that are looking for more stable return patterns, that realize that it doesn't need to be all following the ups and downs in the crypto market? Or will it be from transforming the institutional mindset into saying, listen, we can get you into this space for at a much lower cost basis with much more transparency? Which one do you think that the majority of the asset flow is going to come from?
I think it's step by step, all of it. if you look at the origination side, I think there is demand for origination everywhere. It's most likely have the right due diligence, risk assessment criteria to have quality assets on board. But I think, hey, there is still enough demand out there to be financed. I mentioned the SME financing gap. Really Google it. It's insane. Just to have one example. On the investment side, I think it's really starting with crypto investors who would like to diversify their portfolio and not solely rely on, let's say, the crypto volatility, how Phil, you pointed it out. But we already see institutions coming in, and institutions actually, they, as you mentioned, really look at cost efficiency 24/7. Actually, they themselves can decide to invest, divest. They do not need an intermediary to do that. They may have still a custodian taking care of their tokens, but it is them pressing the button and not an investment bank acting on their behalf. So we see that already. And then I think the biggest, brightest future, biggest opportunity is really connecting other DeFi protocols like Maker, as most likely you know, the decentral bank for DeFi, other liquidity sources, and combine that in a model where what we are providing is securitization as well, where you can actually have a portfolio of real-world assets and then can create tranches and have a tranche for every investor and its risk appetite, where MakerDAO is most likely the base investor, kind of, like a central bank. They would like to have volume, but very strong, very stable assets, very low risk. Also, what Maker is looking for, I think 0% default. And I think with a structure like this, we can provide that, And other investors, they would like to go in full risk. They go for a junior tranche, flex income. They understand the asset, underwriting, etc. So you see the world is changing. It's not a single bank anymore. Actually, everyone can play a role in the new financial system and decide on what role they would like, he would like to take.
Love it. I love it. And I really feel it. And, with anything in this space, it feels like there's this ratcheting that needs to happen of one side and the other side, where you've got the supply, you need to ratchet up, and you need to ratchet up the demand, right? And slowly, but actually in this space, everything moves in dog years, right? So 1 year is 7 years, and it's going to move really fast. Alejandro, for you, thinking about the different asset classes, I know from our first chat that you and I had down in Dunleary, just south of Dublin City, for all those non-Dubliners out there, where Alejandro and I, after a kind introduction for Brian Elders, who's hopefully out there in the crowd somewhere, said he was going to heckle me. Yeah, there he is. Alejandro and I went for a walk, and Alejandro, you're from Colombia, right? Originally,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And Alejandro doesn't drink anything but Colombian coffee for the most part. If the coffee's not Colombian, he gets a cup of tea. I got a cup of tea as well for our walk. We had a great chat, and my main curiosity, I'm going to ask you this again, was that within each one of these asset classes, because I have familiarity with these asset classes from my days in the hedge fund space, and I remember what it was like to try to take custody of these assets, to try to transform them into vehicles that could be held within an investment context and could actually generate yield for investors. Are there some specific bottlenecks that you guys are working on with D-Factor within specific asset classes that you think will unlock some more volume coming into the space? And if you can crack that nut.
Yeah, definitely. That's an important point out of the whole operation component on validating assets and having custody of the assets. At the end of the day, the most important thing is, well, there is not a duplication of assets, that people are not double dipping and just using in multiple liquidity pools, but also that physically you are in control of that asset, because in the case of liquidation, you can physically just take it and make it liquid, right? So going into the asset component, what I see more appetite at the moment is the traditional financial assets that everybody knows, invoices, one of them, traditional financial services like, for example, trade finance, inventory finance, everybody understands, are the first one for us in DeFactor. Those are the first assets that we're going to be onboarding. And from there, we have identified that luxury goods is another type of asset that fits really well into this description. The reason behind, and something I have been exploring in the alcohol space, right, and distillery, winemaking, fine enough, these companies are sitting on millions and millions of dollars of stock that is in a bonded warehouse controlled by the government and is completely liquid. And nobody just giving them a coin for all the stock that is extremely valuable. For example, in the case of Irish distilleries, what they do is selling the younger stock. So in that case, they can fund their operations, and they have so much valuable stock that if they have that liquidity, they could have exponentially growth the volume of whiskey that is at the moment in complete shortage. Because it's true, like Irish whiskey is in shortage because there's no liquidity on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So same with winemakers. So you're saying explore that DeFi can open all these possibilities for assets that before were completely impossible to finance in the traditional space. But now we're realizing that there's an opportunity, and who knows what else is coming out of, for example, we were just discussing with Martin a couple of days ago, the Metaverse, and the amount of services that are going to be provided inside the Metaverse, right? Try to imagine like a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, try to provide liquidity to some of those services that are going to be provided there.
I mean,
because there's no bank that is going to even go close or near to that.
well, buying up property in Decentraland, right? Buying up Upland, I just discovered Upland last week and started messing around with that. And then securitizing virtual property into DeFi liquidity pools. Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's very few bottlenecks there.
No, I think the opportunity is just mind-blowing. Like, we don't know what is coming in the next 6 months, in the next year. And that's the beauty out of the space.
Ooh, I hadn't thought of that yet. Now you got me thinking. That's good. That's good.
Knows.
Phil, speaking of real estate, right? I know that when we first all spoke together a couple weeks ago, you were talking about the attractiveness of bringing a solution to some of the archaic processes in the real estate market and saying we can do better. And that looking at DeFi, you're seeing an opportunity to do better on the process improvement side, but also considering the stability of the asset class of real estate. Can you talk a little bit about the case for real estate in DeFi and how you see that perhaps unfolding?
Yeah, I guess the maker perspective is more like a non-bank bank, right? So what we have is an extremely low cost of capital, and it's just a matter of applying it efficiently, right? But what banks have is, a lot of inefficiencies. So that's where we're seeing the low-hanging fruit right now, is we fill these gaps, kind of like in invoice factoring or trade finance. But in real estate, we have to sort of pick our areas because it's obviously well populated, right? I mean, every bank in the world is competing for real estate loans, and it's, $326 trillion of global value in real estate. So even a tiny fraction of that is very significant for DeFi. But banks can't underwrite everything. And so there's so many areas, maybe Metaverse, but I think, even in the real world, there's so many areas where we can just outcompete. And we just, for example, with Centrifuge, did a deal for revenue-based financing. Mm-hmm. This is kind of a relatively new kind of financing where you loan against the company's SaaS revenue. So it's typically SaaS companies, yeah.
So like Pipe in the US.
Yeah, Pipe is one of the asset originators for this particular partner, yeah. And that's, extremely lucrative. It's reasonably easy for us to do, but we still have to develop a risk framework for it, right? And Centrifuge helps with that, but then, there's so many other kinds of assets out there. Recently, Societe Generale came to Maker, right? And they want to sort of develop borrowing, a credit line against RMBS bonds, basically. So that's a form of, residential mortgage-backed security, and it's just another variation on what we're trying to do in real estate. But they're just one of several and many more coming now that, all the banks are looking for, a lower cost of capital, right?
Absolutely. I've got one for you that you might not have known about. You've got a good background in e-commerce, right? Okay, there's a very hot Irish fintech startup right now called Wayflyer. And what Wayflyer do, they just raised a big 63 million Series B or Series C, I think, and they went very quickly during the pandemic. What Wayflyer do is they provide financing to e-commerce platforms. Originally, all they were providing was SaaS. They were just providing an analytics platform so that as an e-commerce platform, you could get a good understanding of what you were selling, right? If Wayflyer are providing that, then they have insight to all the inflows and the outflows. So you can then build a financing platform off the back of that because you have a very good understanding of the risk. Technically, we could then take that financing that Wayflyer are providing to e-commerce platforms, package that up on Centrifuge through the Tin Lake app, and have that backing liquidity pools, right? That's all. It's not even the art of the possible, it's the art of the now, right?
Yeah, that's a RBF, revenue-based financing.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's already happening. So we pay musicians the streaming revenues on Spotify early out, that they do not need to wait 90 days. We pay Uber drivers that they do not wait Uber to pay them. Just those examples. Yeah, YouTubers, TikTok, what is a TikTok? Exactly, the same thing. So all these gig economies, I think, and these new kind of how to actually employ yourself, make money, even there, DeFi works, because it's actually a new type of liquidity, which most likely works much better for this new types of engagement.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Just to get kind of some of the numbers around this, and if you get excited by big numbers. I've heard recently that once you start talking about billions and trillions, people's eyes just glaze over here. Think about way too many zeros, right? But there's $100 trillion in the wealth and asset management market right now. A lot of those assets, at least 40% of those, are assets that are probably ripe for securitization and bringing into DeFi. On top of that 100 trillion, there's probably another 150 to 200 trillion of financial wealth that's out there. And then probably 350 trillion, maybe 320 trillion of real estate assets, rounding out about 600, 700 trillion. Again, your eyes start to glaze over. You think about, we have about 100 billion right now, which is just one tiny smidgen of these numbers I'm talking about. 100 trillion in total value locked in DeFi, about 2 trillion, maybe pushing 3 trillion in crypto right now. We're just scratching the surface here. And the numbers that could pour into this space with the efficiency of these kind of platforms and the low cost of being able to support things through this type of platform, it's just staggering. That's what I'm most excited about in this space, is just seeing a lot of this old school legacy stuff just not necessary anymore. You guys, what are you most excited about in this space as we're looking forward? Alejandro, you want to start with you, yeah?
Yeah, for me, I think it's creating a fairer system that can provide finance to people that is in real need. I think for me that describes the passion that I have for the DeFi ecosystem.
Makes a lot of sense. Phil, what do you think? What are you most excited about?
Well, as a person, it's the democratization, right? But as a kind of like a non-banker, I think we have so much value out in the real world, right? And the way DeFi will grow is to capture more of that value. The only other way it's going to grow, and the way it's been growing, is token appreciation and kind of like artificial yield, right? Which is great, but, and maybe someday, some crypto will replace fiat or whatever, and then everything changes. But, until then, the two paths of growth, right, are the native one and then the non-native one. And so we need to get the non-native one working, right? It's to have the other path there, yeah?
Yeah, it's a big path, absolutely. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, I think that decentralized finance is really starting truly to decentralize is for me most important, and I see that happening, the first steps. You know, if you look at what's going on in decentralized finance, most of the projects, Centrifuge is maybe an example, or on the road to decentralization, but most likely not there yet. Maker is one of the most advanced protocols, I think, on that route, and really kind of stellar, and everyone is looking after you guys, what you are doing, and how you know, it's a great learning experience for everyone, and there are more and more protocols doing that, and that those decentralized business models seem to work. That will be the real game changer, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, absolutely, when it becomes decentrifuge, right?
Centrifuge itself is already decentralizing things.
I know,
you know?
I know. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. But you know, I see that. Any questions out in the crowd before we keep going? Anyone have anything burning that they'd like to know about real-world assets and DeFi? Anybody raising their hand out there?
Well, maybe I could make a little bit of a
Yeah,
plug.
please, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, if anybody has a platform that doesn't have to be tokenization, but just dealing with financial assets, definitely, you know, come up and chat. We're really open to that kind of thing. And of course, if there's any other kinds of assets that you can think of, definitely suggest those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about this long path that we're on as well, and I talk about this frequently, guys, is that, you know, I've gotten my past from a long career in the traditional financial markets, just this, you know, compelling desire to eradicate all of that old school stuff that meant that for every transaction booked in the financial markets, you need 10 people to tell you what was done because no one can trust each other. All right, and I see so much opportunity to eradicate that. And that's a strong path coming from my past up to the current day. The constructs that are in place to enable that to happen, like you said, there's a big opportunity here for that native wealth that's out there, that is an analog state in the traditional space right now. The opportunity to digitalize that is massive. What that unlocks then, and getting it right with this, although a lot of folks will say if we just continue on this organic path, we can get to a point where we have more crypto users than non-users of crypto in the world. I think we could just do a lot better if we connect it all. By getting it to the point where we can start to digitalize this wealth that's out there, the innovation that unlocks, because Alejandro, you're doing things like you're doing, of removing these bottlenecks for this to happen. It's not just about real-world assets like we know of today, but it's about bringing in media, the arts, sports collectibles, the NFT side that we're all, you know, a lot of folks are working on right now.
I think you're spot on, right? I think that the diversification of assets is going to create or provide that validation that is needed to say, yeah, this actually works. It's not just for traditional financial assets, it's for absolutely everything. And that's the magic out of it.
Yeah, I've got a baseball card collection back home in Boston that I'd love to back into a liquidity pool. We'll see. Martin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, sure, I cannot more than agree. A token is a token, and you can actually kind of use it for digital art, you can use it for baseball cards, and you can use it for invoices, and that is exactly what we are doing. Make them liquid, pull them up, and let them scale, that whoever in DeFi would like to invest can invest.
Yeah. On that point on the market invoicing, obviously there's a lot of players out there right now that are providing that on an old school basis. What do you think will happen to them?
I don't know, honestly. Maybe something you will take?
Peter, can I just interrupt? We've got a question here on the floor. Peter?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we got a couple questions.
Hi, just a quick one to the panel. Investing into real-world assets and traditional finance assets has regulations. And the regulators, I think slow is probably doing them a favor to describe their approach to digital and crypto at the moment. What does the panel think about the inevitability of regulation change, or how much of an impact is that going to just stop potentially any of this development that you're discussing?
Do you want to take regulatory?
I can take that, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think most likely regulation is the biggest hurdle of let it grow as it could grow. We need to spend an insane amount in lawyers and kind of creating legal frameworks. We need to follow the regulation. We are not out there in an open space. Unfortunately, we would like to finance real-world assets. You're connected to the real world and the real-world regulation, and we need to abide that and need to follow and trying to create with the regulators also an environment for innovation. And that's also why, if you follow a little bit what I have described, we already actually started at the beginning of DeFi. If you look now at DeFi and TVL, still 99.9% is locked in crypto assets, and there's a reason for that, and this is exactly that. So all the pools we're spinning up on Centrifuge, you have mentioned, they have a legal framework which is very traditional and is additionally on what's happening on-chain, creating an off-chain legal framework with a special purpose vehicle managing the pool, with investor onboarding, going through KYC, with contracts, investment contracts, private placement memorandum, for example, you need to sign if you invest in it, etc. So there is something there. Of course, we're following the regulation, and that is a hurdle. And it's one of those things I think we need to change to make actually the old world, enabling the old world for DeFi, I think, step by step. And that is really where we're in. I think creating the critical mass, I think we're already beyond the point of no return. So it will happen.
I'm with you.
Peter, we got one more question, if that's okay.
Do we have one more?
Hi, thanks for your insight so far. It's really interesting to hear. I have two connected but possibly slightly different questions. The first is, for this particular area of DeFi and Web3 and everything, what skills are most short right now? And maybe a second question is, for people that maybe are not, that don't have the same background with traditional finance or real world asset management, risk services, all of that whole side of things, for people who may be more in the native world, or maybe the builders, the coders, who don't have the same exposure to the experience that you have, what can that community do to help you?
So the second part of the question I got, which was, what do those that are not, that don't have the grounding in real world assets, but are natives to digital assets and to crypto, what can they do to help? That's what I'm hearing, the second part of the question. The first part of the question I didn't get.
What skills in the areas that you are all working in are most in demand right now, are most short? It may not be people building things. It may be other skill sets or other things, community management, other things like that. I'm not sure.
We could take that first. What's most in demand in skills, and what are we most short of in this space right now? Go ahead, Phil.
Now that we're building the factor, like the skill set, the shortage is everywhere at the moment, actually. Starting for tech, one of the things that we were just discussing previous panel, like getting into coders at the moment is really difficult, extremely difficult. But also, I think the transition for example, people that know how to do risk assessment, risk mitigation, and move them from the traditional system into the DeFi of digital assets can be tricky. And it can bring like it can take a huge amount of education to convince them that there is future in what we're doing, right? And explain how it works, because it's a bit different. So I think those areas for me, I think they're the skills that are in huge shortage in what we're doing.
Great. And I think I have an answer for the second question. But maybe grab me off stage and we can do that. I'm getting a heads up from my friends down on the right-hand side that we are out of time. So with that, I just wanted to say thanks to Phil, to Alejandro, and to Martin. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, guys.